Okay, welcome to Psych 230, Social Psychology. Today we're going to continue with Chapter 3. We're going to start Chapter 3, I should say, and we're going to talk about social cognition, which has to do with basically how we think. Okay, how we think, but it involves other people. So social means has to do with others, cognition has to do with thinking. Okay, so how we think about ourselves and others is really what this is about. So we're going to define what social cognition is. We're going to talk about the 4 core processes of social cognition, 4 things that are involved, 4 processes. We'll talk about the goals, right? What we're hoping to achieve when we think about ourselves and others. And other things, just problems, mental bias, right? When we use this stuff more, when we use them less. And the last thing, which we're not going to get to today, but attributional theories are going to be a little bit more complicated. It's going to take a bit more time. We won't get to that today, but I'll try to get through about half of this. Okay, we'll see how long it takes. Okay, so first, what is social cognition? Social cognition, it says there is the process of thinking and making sense of oneself and others. So it's really, social cognition is about how we think about ourselves and others, how we make sense of our own behavior, others' behavior, that sort of thing. It has to do with how we gather information, right? How we gather information, what we attend to, what we ignore, what we focus on, and how we understand ourselves and others based on that information. That is social cognition. Whenever you see the word cognition, it means it has to do with thinking, and social means it has to do with other people. And this class is social psychology, so it's about that. Okay, so let's continue. So here are the 4 core processes of social cognition. They are attention, interpretation, judgment, and memory. This is just an outline. We're going to talk about these 4 things individually, one by one. So this is just an outline. Let's just keep going. So first is attention, right? One thing that's very important to how we understand ourselves and others is attention. Attention, as you guys already know, is when we consciously focus on certain information. We attend to certain things. We pay attention to some things. And attention is limited. There's only so much of it, okay? It has to do with our short-term memory, actually, and there's only so much of it. There's only so many things we can notice and think about at the same time. So because it's limited, different people will focus on different features of the same situation. Some people will focus on some things and miss others, right? And that's just the way it is. It's hard to basically focus on everything. We can only focus on so many things. And if you remember anything about how memory works, actually memory will be one of the processes, but short-term memory, actually, we could only attend to about 7 different things at one time, 7 different words, numbers, things like that. But the point is that attention is limited. And we're going to focus on some things and ignore others. So as an example, let's say you're talking with someone, right? So you're speaking with someone and maybe you notice that the person is funny, right? You notice his or her humor, right? That's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on what they're saying, their words, right? That kind of stuff. But you're ignoring other things. Your friends, on the other hand, that are looking at you, like maybe from a few feet away or from a distance, notice that the person isn't just talking to you. The person is also checking you out, so to speak, looking you up and down and stuff like that, checking you out, right? But you're missing that because you are having a conversation and you're focusing on the person's words, okay? And, that happens a lot, by the way. I don't know if I should tell you about an experience there, but I had when I first started teaching here, I had an experience. I guess I should tell you. I was being evaluated. So I had someone observing my class and doing my teaching, and taking questions and having discussion and all that stuff, and just going about my business, doing my job and, focusing on the information and attending to questions and things like that. Afterward, the evaluator told me, what she thought was going on. And I didn't notice what she was talking about. I just took it as I was doing my job. I'm addressing questions, things like that. But there was one person who kept asking questions and kept chiming in, so to speak, and stuff like that. And then the evaluator told me, "Oh, I think so-and-so has a crush on you." And I'm like, really? I have not noticed that. I mean, there's nothing that I noticed that would have suggested that. But when you are doing your job, you're focusing on information, things like that, and especially when you're being evaluated and you're really thinking about how you're doing, you're going to miss cues and things like that when people look at you in a certain way or something like that. I'm not saying I'm some hot shot or anything or someone like that, but I obviously was not aware of that. And even if I was, it's not something that I should respond to. Okay, but I was paying attention to some things, I was missing others, and that is always what is happening whenever we are attending to ourselves or others. Whenever we're thinking and trying to make sense of others or ourselves, we're going to attend to some things and we're going to miss others. We're going to miss other things. So different people can notice different things. Okay, so that's attention. Another is interpretation. People are going to interpret things differently. Interpretation is how we give meaning to the info we experience. Okay, so many situations can be interpreted in more than one way. So you're talking to someone, and because of what you notice and what you're attending to, you interpret the situation as just a platonic conversation, just a friendly conversation. But your friends, they see it as flirting. You're talking to the person and they say, oh, look at those two talking to each other. Say, oh, look, they're flirting, right? That's their interpretation. Or in my experience, when I was being evaluated, my evaluator knows that person was being particularly friendly and nice or whatever it is, and that person was kind of had a crush on me and stuff like that. I didn't notice that. I didn't notice whatever was happening there, right? I didn't attend to that specific information, whatever it was. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a wink or I don't know what it was, right? Because I didn't attend to it. And therefore I didn't make that interpretation. I didn't think that was the case, right? That would lead, so the information you attend to leads you to, one interpretation or the other. Okay, so that's interpretation. Okay, now here's another one for you guys. Another core process is judgment. Don't get judgment confused with interpretation. Judgment is different. Judgment is when you form an impression of someone and you make some decision about what that person is like. It implies you're evaluating them in some way, that they are, good or bad, mean or nice, right? Whatever it is, right? That's, you make a judgment. So first, you attend to some things, and then you interpret what's going on, and then you might also make a judgment, make a decision about what that person is like. Okay, we have limited information, so many of our judgments are actually best guesses. Many times we judge people on the basis of limited information, and we may not really know what is going on. Okay, so you're talking with the person, right? You were noticing the person's humor. That's what you attended to, right? And you interpreted a platonic conversation, and you judge the person as a nice person. Your friends, on the other hand, they were noticing other things. They attended to other things. They noticed the person was checking you out, right? They interpret that as flirting, and then they see the person who is doing the flirting as a player, so to speak, right? Different judgment. When you make a judgment, you're saying something about the person. They're good or bad, nice, mean, evil, whatever it is, moral, immoral. That's a judgment. It's different than an interpretation. So that's one of the 4 core processes. That's the third one. And the other one is memory. Okay. Memory, as we know, is when we store and retrieve information for future use, right? Memory also matters. Memory affects what we attend to, how we interpret it, and the judgment that are made. Memory affects everything. Okay. For instance, if you don't recall that a certain someone has flirted with you in the past or winked at you or whatever it is, right? Then you may not notice him, his or her present flirting, and may not interpret the behavior as flirting, and therefore may not see him or her as a player, so to speak. Yeah, if you don't remember somebody treating you a certain way or being a certain way, you may not look for that. But when you have seen it before and you remember that, then you tend to look for it. You're more likely to notice it, you're more likely to interpret it in that way, and you're more likely to make a certain judgment. Like if someone was mean to you in the past, right? Then you're more likely to notice when they are when they do mean things to you, or when they act mean to you, right? When they are mean to you, right? In the present, and you're more likely to interpret it as being mean, and you're more likely to judge the person as being a jerk because you've seen it before. And maybe they're not being that mean to you, but because they've treated you a certain way, you're already looking for that. And you're more likely to notice that bad stuff than the stuff that's more neutral. That's how memory affects all these things. So those are the 4 core processes of social cognition. I know that wasn't that interesting. I tried to make it a little bit interesting by making it about flirting and stuff like that. But those are the 4 core processes. Let's talk about something a little bit more interesting now. Okay. Now, when we're trying to understand ourselves and others, right, it turns out that we have 2 goals in mind, okay? One is that we want to conserve mental effort. In other words, we don't want to think that hard, okay? When we think about ourselves and others, we don't want to try that hard, okay? And another one is that we want to protect or maybe enhance our self-esteem. We want to interpret things in such a way, or we want to think of things in such a way that they allow us to continue to feel good about ourselves. Okay, that's what the research says, that we're lazy when it comes to our thinking. We don't want to think that hard. We want to conserve mental effort, and that we think of things in such a way that it helps us continue to feel good about ourselves. Okay. So no, we are not like scientists. There was another theory. There was a theory that said that when it comes to how we understand ourselves and others, that we are like naive scientists, that we look at the evidence and we make basically, decisions based on the evidence. Turns out we're not that way at all. We're lazy in our thinking, and we're very biased in our thinking. We're not like scientists. Some of us are more than others, especially if you've been trained in scientific thinking and discourse and things like that. But most of the time, no, we're not. Okay. I wouldn't say we're very rational or logical. We're actually more emotional, I would say, to speak of this more generally. Let's keep going, and let's talk about this. Now, when it comes to interpreting behavior, whether it's our own behavior or the behavior of others, there's 2 things that are mutually exclusive that you can think about, right? 2 ways that you can think about other people's behavior. One is to say that that it's basically dispositional. In other words, you can make a dispositional inference about the person's behavior. That means you explain the person's behavior in terms of stable internal characteristics. So something about the person. When you make a dispositional inference, in other words, when you explain somebody's behavior, right, and you say it's something dispositional, what you're really saying is that it's something about them. Something doesn't really change. It's just something about how they are, right? Like if you notice, for instance, that somebody failed an exam, that was their behavior. They failed an exam, let's say, right? If you make a dispositional attribution, you're going to say that the reason they failed the exam is because of something about them, something that is stable about them, right? Something about their ability, their personality, something like that. You might say maybe the person isn't very bright, the person is dumb, or maybe the person is lazy and not motivated. Things like that, right? That's a dispositional inference. You're explaining the behavior in terms of something that is internal, something about the person, and that's usually something stable, something that doesn't change very easily. When you also interpret somebody's behavior, you can also make a situational inference. And this one is easy to understand. You can basically explain the behavior in terms of the situation. So if somebody fails the exam, let's say that was their behavior, right? You can interpret their behavior as being due to the situation, right? The person failed the exam because the person was sick, right? And wasn't functioning very well. And when you're sick, you can't think very well. Maybe you're distracted, your brain isn't working well, or you're very tired, whatever. You can imagine, right, what it's like to take an exam, or maybe even try to write a paper in class. If you take that kind of exam, like in an English class, where you have to write a paper in class in its time, right? And if you have, let's say, the flu or something like that, or you're under the influence of medication, it's making you sick, you can imagine that you're not going to do as well as you could. That would be a situational inference, that you say that the behavior is explained by the situation. Okay. So those are the 2 ways you can explain someone's behavior. You can say it's something about them, dispositional, or it's something about the situation, a situational inference. Technically, you can also say it's a little bit of both. Okay. There's a 3rd option, but right now we just want to think of them separately, so we can make sense of what we're talking about and make it easier to understand. All right, now when it comes to interpreting other people's behavior, it turns out that, like I said, we're lazy when it comes to our thinking. We're very biased in our thinking, okay? So as it says in the top, we want to conserve mental effort when we're going to make a decision about somebody, right? We saw something, we noticed some behavior, or maybe it's our own behavior that we notice, right? So we want to conserve mental effort. We don't want to think that hard. Thinking hard is kind of annoying. It's like when you have to try hard, right? You have to try hard to write a paper or an exam. You don't want to do that, right? So you want to conserve mental effort. You want to make it as easy for yourself as possible. So it turns out, according to research, that because we want to conserve mental effort, we commit all sorts of errors, and we have all sorts of biases when it comes to, interpreting people's behavior or even our own behavior. And one of these biases is called the correspondence bias, also called the fundamental attribution error, a bias or a type of error. In other words, we're not very logical in our thinking, very rational. Okay, we're emotional. We want to make it easy on ourselves, so we commit errors. We have bias in our thinking. You have to know both names, okay? Correspondence bias, same thing as fundamental attribution error. And this is the tendency to explain people's behavior in terms of dispositions and underestimate situational forces. So in other words, when we see somebody do something or something happens to someone, we're more likely to say it's something about them and ignore the situation. So for instance, Greg fails the exam. The professor says that, well, Greg is lazy. That's why he failed the exam. That's the way he explained Greg's behavior. He says Greg is lazy despite knowledge of his health problems, despite the professor knows that Greg has health problems. Greg came up to the professor and said, look, I have these issues. I have these accommodations, right? I require this, this, and this, and I have health problems. And it's going to affect how I do in class. So there comes the first exam. Greg fails it. And the professor basically ignores the situational information and says, well, Greg isn't very bright, or Greg is lazy. That's the correspondence bias or fundamental attribution error. It's basically when you explain the behavior in a dispositional way, say something about the person, something internal, and you basically ignore the situation. Another example I give my 101 students, some of you may have heard this if you were in my 101 class, would be, let's say that, for instance, people who like products, when it's like when we assume that a product is a good product or a certain celebrity likes a product when they endorse it. So let's say LeBron James endorses a product. I don't even know. I've been following sports that much anymore, but I don't know if he has a deal with Nike. Let's say he has a deal with Nike, right? LeBron James endorses Nike. He's out in some commercial there, right? Basically showing you, yeah, I wear Nike. What happens is that Nike sales go up. That's why they pay these celebrities big bucks, right, to endorse these products. Celebrities aren't going to do it for free, okay? So Nike sales go up. Why do Nike sales go up? Because we assume, hey, that's a good product. LeBron James likes that product. We say that we think that the reason LeBron James endorses Nike is because somehow he likes Nike and he thinks it's a good product. But in reality, there's a reason why he's endorsing that product. We know he's getting paid. So we ignore that information. We still ignore that information, say, hey, he likes that product. That's why he's endorsing it. It could still be true. However, what I'm saying is we have a tendency to discount the situation, to ignore the situation and zero in on just the person, say it's something about them. They like that product or that reflects how they are, who they are, right? And ignore the situation. That's the correspondence bias. Hopefully that didn't confuse you guys, but there are others that are going to sound very similar and you have to know the difference. By the way, how do you know if you're ready for this, right? Ready for the exam, ready for the homework, right? If you can come up with your own examples of these, that means you understand them. And that means you're thinking critically, okay? And by the way, we can ask ourselves again, why do we do this? Why do we have a tendency to discount the information, ignore the situation, and just say, it's something about the person. It's just the way that person is. LeBron James likes Nike. Or, Greg is just lazy, or he's not that bright. Why do we do that? Well, it's conserving mental effort. Why? It's easier to do that. It's easier to say the person is lazy, the person is not smart, or the person just likes the product, right? Or that's just who they are. That's easier to do than it is to think about the situation and say, well, we need to consider the situation. There's this, and therefore this, right? That is more logical, rational thinking. That takes more effort. We don't want to do that. We're lazy, is what the research says. So we're more likely to just focus on the person and say, that's the way they are. That's why they did that. That's the correspondence bias, the fundamental attribution error. There's also the actor-observer effect. The actor-observer effect is similar, but not exactly the same. The actor-observer effect is the tendency to explain our own behavior in situational terms and that of others in dispositional terms, okay? So actor-observer effect. So when we're the actor, right? When we do something, we're likely to say it's the situation. We make excuses for our own behavior, in other words. So if you fail the exam, you're full of excuses, right? Oh, I was sick. I didn't have time to study, or I got a job that makes me work long hours. You're full of excuses. You talk all about the situation, right? When it's you, when you're the actor. But when you're the observer, when it's somebody else's behavior, you say it's something about them. So when you fail the exam, it's because you were sick, because you had issues, right? If somebody else fails the exam, it's because that person is dumb. That person is lazy, right? So in other words, we make excuses for our own behavior. We're more likely to say it's situational. But when it comes to other people, we're more likely to say it's dispositional. That's something about them. We're not as likely to make excuses for other people. And we talked about why already. It's harder to look at the situation and look at that and make a decision. We don't want to do that. So we're lazy in our thinking. But when it comes to ourselves, right? When it comes to ourselves, we want to make all the excuses if it's something bad that happened. That's the actor-observer effect. It's called the actor-observer effect because the interpretation that we make is different based on whether we're the actor or the observer. When it comes to ourselves, we're full of excuses. And when it comes to others, well, we say it's about them. It's easier to do that. And here, by the way, we're not just conserving mental effort. We are conserving mental effort, being lazy in our thinking when we say that someone else is just lazy or dumb, right? We just say it's something about them rather than the situation. But when it comes to our own behavior, we say it's a situation. And there we're thinking a little bit harder about it, right? But at the same time, we are protecting our self-esteem. We're continuing to feel good about ourselves by saying it's not my fault. It's because of this, this, and this, right? You don't say it's because I'm dumb, it's because I'm lazy. You say, no, it's because of this, this, and this. It's not my fault. I really am not that way. I'm not irresponsible. I'm not dumb, right? That's the actor-observer effect. Here we are protecting our self-esteem and also being lazy in our thinking at the same time. We're being lazy when it comes to other people. And for us, we're protecting our self-esteem. That's the actor-observer effect. There's another one, the self-fulfilling prophecy. You guys have heard about this one. You can probably understand, you probably know what it means already. But the self-fulfilling prophecy is also about social cognition. The self-fulfilling prophecy is basically when we have certain expectations, and that leads us to act in a certain way. It leads us to actions that confirm those expectations. So we believe something, and then we act in a certain way, and then that confirms our expectation. For example, Bob believes Jill is submissive. So therefore, Bob intimidates her. And then Jill withdraws. And therefore, Bob gets to confirm his expectation and continues to believe that, yeah, Jill is submissive. I'll give you a better example. You believe that somebody's a jerk. That's what you believe, right? So you're mean to them and you make them a jerk. And then you get to believe that they are a jerk. See how that works? Right? That's the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's another one of these biases, another one of these things that we tend to do. And we're being lazy in our thinking. We don't want to think about, let's say, like Bob doesn't want to think about Jill so much, and maybe Jill's not submissive, and there's all these instances in which she hasn't been submissive. He doesn't want to do that. That requires too much effort. He believes she's submissive, and therefore treats her in a certain way, and then gets to continue to believe that. Self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We could apply this, to politics, right? Democrats think Republicans are awful. Republicans think that Democrats are awful, right? and they act in ways that bring out the worst in each other. We're a very divided country, and we continue to believe that the other side is awful, right? That's the thing, right? The way you treat others is going to affect how they treat you. And we finally have a president, by the way, who is trying to unite, who says he's going to be willing to work with the other side. We'll see if it happens, right? We'll see if people are real, because it's not just him, it's also Congress, right? And the Senate and things like that. We'll see if they can work together, or if they're just so divided now that that's impossible, right? But the self-fulfilling prophecy is basically that. When you believe something, and then your actions are such that it brings that out, and then you continue to believe that. Okay, that's the thing. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It could also apply to you. You know, what you think about yourself. You believe you're dumb, so you don't study for the exam. You fail the exam, and then you get to continue to believe that you're dumb. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy. Or you believe you're ugly and that nobody likes you, so therefore you don't go out, you don't meet people, you don't get to make friends or find a partner, right? Because you don't go out, and then you continue to believe that you're ugly and undesirable. See how that works? Right? It's a very powerful thing. Let's keep going. More about conserving mental effort. So when we interpret behavior, whether it's our own or others, we're trying to preserve our expectations. We're trying to continue to believe what we believe. Okay, we're very biased in our thinking. We're very set in our ways. It's actually very hard for people to change. So we notice relevant information. So we notice things that confirm our expectations, right? We'll notice, for instance, when Jill is submissive, or we'll notice when so-and-so is acting dumb or stupid, right? Right? We notice that stuff that confirms what we believe, right? We'll notice times when Republicans are doing awful things and supporting awful people, and they will notice things that when Democrats are doing things that they don't like, right? We'll notice things that are relevant, right? And when it's something that's not clear, we'll interpret it in a way that, when it's something ambiguous, it's not clear, we'll interpret it in such a way that it continues to confirm our expectations. Like, for instance, when Jill acts in a way that we don't know if she's really being submissive or maybe assertive, we're more likely to go with submissive, so we can continue to believe what we believe. And we'll even remember consistent information. We'll remember when the other side, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, acted in certain ways. We'll remember the bad stuff and not so much the good stuff, because we want to continue to feel a certain way about them. We want to continue to believe that they're harmful, right? That they're evil, that they're bad. And that's what happens. We're very biased in our thinking. When it comes to other people, when it comes to groups, political groups, right? Or other groups, whatever it is, we are not very rational. We are very emotional and very biased in our thinking. We all are. And it's gotten so bad that we don't even live in the same reality anymore. It's just gotten ridiculous, like I said before, previous lectures. Let's talk a little bit more about this. So how are we doing on time? Let me just check the time. We're doing fine. Okay, now, more about conserving mental effort. So we also tend to make judgments, right, of other people. That we say certain things about other people, and we often use what are called cognitive heuristics. This all has to do with how we understand ourselves and others. Okay, so we tend to use cognitive heuristics as well. Cognitive heuristics are basically mental shortcuts that we use to make judgments. Just think of them as mental shortcuts to keep it simple. So we want to conserve mental effort. We don't want to think that hard. So we take shortcuts in our thinking. Cognitive means has to do with thinking. Heuristic means that it's a shortcut. We tend to take shortcuts, okay? And here are some of these shortcuts, okay? The representative heuristic. It's a way of thinking. It's kind of a shortcut in our thinking. It's a very biased way of thinking. But the representative heuristic is basically when we classify something as belonging to a certain category to the extent that it is similar to that category. So we say that something is, or someone must be a member of this group because they're similar to that group. So we judge a student, for instance, to be a fraternity member. That student must be in a fraternity, right? Or must be a frat boy, so to speak, because he drinks beer, he has many friends, he likes to party, right? Because he shows behavior that is similar, he must be a member of that category. Okay. Let me put it to you this way. Okay, it's almost it's kind of like the opposite of a stereotype. Okay, when you stereotype, what you do is you judge people based on the category. So stereotype would be, okay, so fraternity members, right? Fraternity members, they like to party, they drink beer, they have many friends, they're very sociable, right? That's the stereotype. Here, we're doing the opposite. We're saying because the person drinks beer, is sociable, has lots of friends, they must be a member of that category. So it's kind of like the opposite. Not really the opposite. I'm not sure if the reverse, but it's basically the same thing. It's just in the reverse way. That's the representative heuristic. So we say that someone is likely to be a member of a certain group because they are similar to that group. I could try to make it a little bit more interesting or a little bit, I don't know, weird for you guys, you know? Hey, if you sound like a man, look like a man, people are going to think you're a man. Maybe you're a woman. There's people like that, right? And they talk to you on the phone. Guess what happens? Yeah, if you have a very deep voice, people are going to think you're a man, but maybe you're a woman. There are women like that. And I've had students like that just say, yeah, you know, people think that they're talking to a man when they talk to me because I have a very deep voice. Same thing could happen to men. You have a very light voice and you sound like a woman, right? So to speak, because women have higher pitched voices on average. And when they talk to you on the phone, you know, they haven't talked to you before. They don't know who you are. They might think you're a woman. Other examples, some silly examples there to help you understand. Let's keep going. There's also the availability heuristic. This is a little bit more interesting. The availability heuristic. This is when you estimate the likelihood of an event by the ease of which instances of that event come to mind. Okay. So in other words, you think that something is very likely because you can easily think of it. So an example, right, would be that on the news, you may hear a lot about murder, people killing each other and stuff like that. And you might assume that murders are very common. That if you step out at night, that you're going to get murdered or something like that. If you have to watch your back all the time, or you have to carry a gun or something like that, because you hear a lot about murders and you just think that it just happens all the time. In reality, murder is not actually that common. The murder rate is actually very low. I don't know what the murder rate is. I haven't read about the murder rate of this country in a while, but this is a pretty safe country for the most part. Other countries are much, much less safe. It's not as common as you think. Even in the Antelope Valley, by the way, here where we live, whenever the Antelope Valley, this place that we live in, whenever it's in the news, it's almost always for a bad reason. Some bad parent over here had their kids taken away because they did some really awful things to their kid. Or somebody got killed over here or over there. Somebody's lab blew up because they were cooking meth. That's why we hear about the Antelope Valley. That's usually what we hear on the news, whenever it does make the news. And you might think, oh, there's all these bad people out here, right? If I step out there, I'm going to get murdered. I'm going to get stabbed. I'm going to get robbed, assaulted, right? No, most people are actually good people, people who live here. And you go out there, you'll probably be fine, right? Some areas are more dangerous than others, but it's not as common as you think it is. People who don't live in California, right? They hear about things like earthquakes. There's an earthquake, right, in California, and it makes the news, and people in other parts of the country hear about this earthquake and stuff like that. And because they hear about the earthquake and it makes the news, sometimes they think that somehow these big earthquakes are very common. And they ask you, hey, aren't you scared of living in California? Aren't you scared that there's going to be an earthquake and you're going to die? It's like, no, it doesn't happen that often. Right? There's little earthquakes that happen more frequently, but big earthquakes don't happen that often. In my lifetime, I've only experienced one big earthquake, and it wasn't that bad. I was in junior high. And then there was another big one, and that one, I wasn't even in the state. I was in college. I was at MIT at that time, and I missed that one. I think it's the Northridge quake, right? And no, it doesn't happen that often. You don't really need to be scared, right? But that's what that's the way things are. When you hear about something on the news a lot, or people talk about a lot, they think about a lot, they think it happens all the time. And that's not true, okay? That's a shortcut, right? When we can think about something very easily, we must think that that it's just, it happens a lot, and that's not really the case. Let's keep going. There's also the false consensus effect, okay? And I have a mean example about this one. I should have changed it, but this is being mean, right? But when I like to sometimes tease my students a little bit, especially when we have face-to-face class. But and make it more interesting. The false consensus effect is basically the tendency to overestimate the extent to which others agree with us. False means false, right? Consensus has to do with agreement. The false consensus effect basically says that people agree with us less than we think they do. So how desirable do you think you are? Chances are you believe you're actually more desirable than is actually the case. And why is that? Well, because you want to feel good about yourself. You want to think well of yourself, right? But whatever you agree with, whether you're desirable or whether you think that, a certain kind of song is a really good song, or that someone is a nice person, whatever it is, the things that you believe, you actually have this, not just you, but me as well. We have this tendency to think that somehow our beliefs are somehow more just people are more likely to agree with us on that than is actually the case. That our beliefs are actually more common, that they're not just something that we hold, right? Like, for instance, let me give you another example. Let's talk about politics, right? If you're Democrat, the last election, right, you believe that, the Democratic candidate was going to win and win very easily, right? And what happened is that it was actually a lot closer than you thought. Okay, if you were on the other side, the Republican side, you thought that the Republican candidate, you know who he is, right? You thought that he was going to win and he was going to win big. He actually lost. Okay, both sides tend to overestimate the extent to which people agree with them. And it's not just political parties, it's us too. Whether it's some song you like, you overestimate the extent to which people are going to like that song, or the extent to which people are going to like a certain restaurant, or the extent to which people are going to like you. That's how we are. We have a tendency to think that what we believe is somehow more desirable, that it's the right thing, and other people are just going to agree with us. And you can be very, very wrong. But that's the false consensus effect. We actually believe that more people are in agreement with us than is actually the case. In reality, more people disagree with us and are opposed to what we believe than we realize. And then I learned that very early on when I first went to college, and we had to do a debate in an English class, and we were going to debate marijuana, whether it should be legalized for recreational use or not, or maybe it was legalized for medical use, but a marijuana debate. I'm a good boy, they told me to say no to drugs, stuff like that, and I'd say no to drugs, so I chose the side against marijuana. And I believed, that, hey, people are reasonable, they know it's a drug and that stuff like that, and that drugs are bad for, this stuff. And I thought that just people would agree with me and people would support me. I was so wrong, right? When I had most of the class attacking me, he's like, what? What are you guys, a bunch of potheads? What the heck is wrong with you guys? I was in the minority, I found out. I thought I would be in the majority, but apparently not. I was a good kid who didn't believe in smoking weed or doing drugs in general. And I was surprised when I first went to college at how popular the other side is, right? How wrong I was. I know better now. I know most of you are okay with weed, okay? And I'm not going to judge you for that. But I am still against drugs. I'm not saying that you don't have a right to use it or things like that. They want to legalize it, that's fine, right? I'm not going to smoke it, and I'm not going to teach my kids to use it. I've always been a good boy. I don't believe in artificially making myself happy or things like that. But the thing is, whatever you believe, there's a tendency to overestimate the extent to which other people actually agree with you. Okay, that's the false consensus effect. Let's see how we're doing on time again. All right, we're okay. Couple of more things, then we'll leave it there. Okay, now let's talk a little bit. So that was conserving mental effort, although it also some of those things also allow us to protect our self-esteem. Now, another reason why we think about ourselves and others in a certain way is to protect and enhance our self-esteem. That's the second goal. Okay, we want to make ourselves feel better. One way to make ourselves feel better, and I mentioned this before because we were having a discussion, right? One way you can make yourself feel better is to engage in what's called a downward social comparison. Okay, in other words, you can compare yourself to someone who is worse off, right? Compare yourself to someone who is poorer than you. can make you feel better, right? If you think you're poor, for instance, and you feel miserable because in this country, let's say you're poor, you don't own a home, or your family doesn't live in a home, you live in an apartment in a bad part of town, and you can't afford nice things, and you can't afford a decent lifestyle, right? You take the bus, don't you have a car, right? You feel bad because you're poor, right? You want to make yourself feel better? You can compare yourself with people who are worse off than you. You can compare yourself with those that are homeless, and that'll make you feel better. You want to make yourself feel rich? Compare yourself to people from other countries where people make, basically like $1 an hour. There are countries, right? I know this because I have family in El Salvador, where basically the minimum wage is like $3 an hour. I have a cousin who is a teacher over there, and he could barely make ends meet. We actually have to help him and give him some money every month just so he can basically be able to, pay for his place to live and feed his kids. Otherwise, he can't make it. A lot of those people are so poor, they need help from others. And it's ridiculous. And he has a job, he's a teacher, and he only gets paid for a certain number of hours. And they make him work a whole bunch more hours. And he actually ends up making about 50 cents an hour with all the hours that he works. Okay. And it's really messed up compared to what we get paid here. Right. Think about that. And then tell me now, right, if you feel poor now, when you think about that kind of stuff, or the way it's like in other countries, right? In reality, you are rich compared to other people in other countries, or you can feel that way. But you're not going to compare yourself usually to those people. You usually compare to other people here. So, but that's one way you can make yourself feel better, is compare yourself to those that are worse off. I know it sounds mean, but it really does help. I feel bad because I invested in a certain stock, and I lost like $8,000. Actually, I haven't lost the money yet because I haven't sold the stock. I believe it's going to go back up eventually. I might have to wait a year or months or whatever it is. I think it's going to go back up eventually, right? But I feel messed up. Like, damn, I lost a whole bunch of money there, right? And I read about other people who invested more money in that same stock, people who have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, people obviously who have more money. And then I don't feel so bad. It's like, I didn't lose anything compared to those people. Or talk about the whole thing about that's been going on lately, right, with GameStop, right, how it's been skyrocketing in price. And there's people who have made a lot of money. And then there's people who have lost millions, or hedge funds that have lost billions. Now I don't feel so bad, right? I wish I was one of those people who made millions, but I didn't know about that, right? So I'm not in that stock. But the one there's one I invested in, it went way down. I lost like half my money, but I haven't sold it yet. I'm going to recover. I believe I'm going to recover, but I don't feel as bad as other people who invested more, right? But anyways, you can compare yourself with those that are worse off, make yourself feel better. I know that stock market example is probably not a good example. It's hard to relate to that, right? A lot of you probably don't know how the stock market works, or maybe even have money to invest. It's something that, people who are usually better off financially can do, and stuff like that. And not a good example, but I gave you guys another one. You can also protect and enhance your self-esteem. Believe it or not, you can make yourself feel better by engaging in an upward social comparison. This sounds counterintuitive. Let me explain. Okay, you can compare it to someone who's better off, and that can actually inspire you. Like maybe you're not doing so well, you're getting a C in the class, right? Let's say, right? But you notice that other people are getting A's, and you know who those people are, right? And knowing of people who are getting A's in the class who are doing well might inspire you and say, hey, if he can do it, I can do it too. That's an upward social comparison. An upward social comparison usually works in this way when you compare yourself to others that are similar to you. So when it's your sister, your brother, someone like you, someone similar to you who is doing well, that can inspire you because you think, if they can do it, I can do it too. But upward social comparisons can also make you feel worse. Usually they make you feel worse. If you compare yourself to someone who's doing better, usually you feel worse, right? Usually when you compare yourself to an A student, you feel stupid, you feel worse, you feel like you're dumb. What's wrong with me, right? But if you can relate to them, if you have some connection with them, they can inspire you, they can make you feel better, right? But when they have no relation to you, it's hard, right? Usually makes you feel worse. Well, like when I compare myself to those investors I read about, online who have made millions of dollars, I feel like, what the hell's wrong with me? Why can't I invest that well? It's like, why am I not that smart? I can't really figure out the stock market. It's not my thing, by the way. I'm not smart in that way. I think I've figured out some things, but that makes me feel worse. Like, why are all these people making money and not me? I've lost money. I feel worse, right? But if I find someone who's just like me, let's say my brother or someone like that, and they happen to know what they're doing and they're making money, and then that's more likely to make me feel like, hey, man, I can do it too. Like, they're not better than me. So it depends, right? If you share a connection with the person, they're doing better than you, then that can inspire you to do better. If they are very different from you and you can't relate well to them, comparing yourself to them makes you feel worse. That's like when you're poor, you compare yourself to a rich person and you feel miserable, you feel poor. I feel poor when I compare myself to those people that you read about, right? Those people who are making tons of money, right? I feel poor, but in reality, I'm not. But I can feel very poor when I compare myself to those people. But maybe it can inspire me to do well, to invest, and maybe become like them, right? If I relate to them. But I don't know any people who are rich. So it usually does the opposite. So usually this doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for a lot of people, but it can. If you have someone that you can relate well to, right? They're doing better. That can inspire you to do better. It can make you feel better. But usually upward social comparisons make you feel worse, because usually the people you're comparing yourself to are different than you. And the reason they're doing better than you is because they're not like you. They don't have the privilege. I mean, they have other privileges that you don't. Okay. Let's stop there. Okay. Because we're more than halfway and I don't want to get too far ahead, and I'm going to have a very short lecture next time. So I'll stop here.